3 state agencies. Ladies and gentlemen, Ms. Deborah Gardner. So as I do with the first panel, this topic of conversation is related to, again, our newly elected governor has decided to not demonstrate a willingness to accept everyone in his community, everyone in the Commonwealth. So here we have CRT, critical race theory. Here we have LGBTQIA issues that have to be fought and legislated as opposed to making it a human right. And then on top of all of that, he decided to build a tattletale line to tell on our teachers if they dare to step outside of the boundaries of his executive order. So we're going to start with Ms. Melendez to give us any comments regarding the teacher tip line or opening comments, teacher tip line, CRT, or LGBTQIA issues.
Awesome. I'm so glad I get to start. So I'm going to approach this. Sorry, I think my microphone's a little off. Is that better? There we go. As the union president for the last almost year now, I think all of these issues come to a head when we talk about educators as laborers. When you think about being in the workplace, the last thing you want to do is fight to defend your own identity as a person, as a professional, and as a person who students are supposed to trust. And so things like critical race theory, like this teacher tip line, they're just mechanisms for teachers to feel like they're not valued in the workplace anymore and for them to find other sources of income. They're probably going to be twice as much as they make right now. And unfortunately, you know, we're seeing not only in the systemic defunding of the public education system, but now the systemic just disrespect and lack of value for public education for every student in our county, regardless of zip code, regardless of ethnicity, regardless of language that they speak. And so I will turn it back over and let the other panelists speak about that.
Ms. Gardner?
Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. First of all, I want to thank you guys for being here today. You could be doing many things with your Saturday afternoon, but you chose to be here and to be advocates for our kids and for our schools. And I want to thank our folks for inviting me. I guess when I was preparing to come over, I was listening to Joe Biden's speech in Poland. And he started off his speech with the quote, "Be not afraid." And he said that, you know, that came from the Pope, John Paul, the Pope of Poland. But he also got that from the Bible. And I think our last panel talked about fear. But what I want to add to that is when we talk about CRT, when we talk about diversity, when we talk about equity and equality, it is about that fear. It's about, like our other panel said, it's about that indoctrination. And what we need to do, I think it's also about pulling that curtain back on the truth of that indoctrination. And I think that's where that fear stems from. It stems from the truth, and the truth hurts. So if we talk about history, if we talk about diversity, then that's going to be just like the Wizard of Oz when they pulled the curtain back. You've been lying to us. You've been lying to yourselves. You've been lying to your children. You've been lying to society, and you don't want to admit the truth. So I think that's where that fear comes from. It's from the truth really hurts. So what we have to do is band together and make those difficult conversations. When we talk about CRT, I think it was Eve who said, have you ever asked any of those people who are talking about CRT, what is CRT? If you do, they cannot tell you. It's not new. They're talking about it like it's new. It's been around for 50 years. And yes, it did start as critical legal theory, not critical race theory. But some person out there who wanted to stoke racism and fear decided, okay, this is the new boogeyman. So we're going to put out some talking points, we're going to give them a new boogeyman, and now it's critical race theory. But we need to have those conversations. And I agree with Eden when she said, we have lost that narrative. You know, you've seen my background, I actually ran for the House of Delegates in the 21 cycle. And none of us running had the answer to when people brought up CRT. Because we wanted to go out and say, well, it's not being taught in our schools. But their definition of what they created it is being taught in our schools. And it's history, people. It's just history. And we need to address those conversations. We need to call these people out. You know, and it all stems back to racism. It stems back to fear of the other, whether it's black people, brown people, LGBTQ people. It's fear of the other. And if we don't start having those conversations, I know we have allies, and we talked about that in the last panel, and most of the people here are allies, and we talk about how we're not racist. But we have to stop saying we're not racist, and we're not a racist, but we need to start being anti-racism.
That's right.
And when you become anti-racism, then you talk about it. Like the person said, you model it in your home. You don't shy away from going to your church and not their church. You don't shy away from saying to my friends who don't look like me, I'm not racist, but you don't talk to your friends who you know are racist. So what I would say is for us to combat some of these like new buzzwords like CRT and divisive concepts, we've got to have those difficult conversations. We've got to have them with our children. We've got to have them with our friends. We've got to have them with our families. We've got to have them with our neighbors. So with that,
Thank you, Deborah. Go to John.
Good afternoon. You're up there. Yes, good. So, John Taylor, and one thing that my bio didn't have is I work for Side by Side, which you may know as Rosemead from before. It's a 31-year-old organization that works with LGBTQ, and we instead of the other letters, we just say plus, because there's lots of other possibilities, right? And so I've been there since 2017, and then all those other interesting things that I've done that I've forgotten about by now. But about all of this, you know, it's very interesting because there is fear, right? And that fear is causing people to have indoctrination to kind of remain where they are. And where they are, one thing that we haven't discussed is power. Power is very interesting because those who have it will do all that they can to hold on to it. And I think that that is where we tend to be today, right? Those with, you know, have amassed so much money, those who have had a legacy in their families of having power are holding on for dear life, right? And another part of power, though, is numbers, right? So you may have dollars, but also numbers, people pulling together can create much more power itself. And part of this power, part of this fear, is to help divide people, right? So all of this divisiveness that has happened is keeping us from talking to our neighbors, right? Keeping us in our homes, keeping us away from all of this. And I think that that is a prescription, you know, as well. I've been a lifelong Democrat, and I can criticize, you know, fellow Democrats in a way because it seems like that we've pulled away from a major base, right? We don't want to talk about working class at all. We are preferencing the very, very wealthy, our corporations, and putting our attention there. Much more than looking at our entire country as well. And so I think that there is power can change, but we have to come together in order to do that. enough of that soapbox. So about an LGBTQ+, that's here. Much of what we do is support in our center and now also over Zoom. With the groups, the other part of what we do is community education. And we're out in the community, we're providing education and resources and training as well. It is evidence-based, right? We work hard to make it so. And essentially, what are we doing, right? In schools and other organizations, we're basically teaching people how to be nice, teaching them how to be good, teaching them not to be afraid, right? It's, the teachers are, what about it? It's like, you can go of that, you know what to do, you know how to interrupt bullying. You can do it here as well. So that's my job, on so many bases, is to do that piece of it. And, people just want to kind of create these stories, these lies, because they're afraid, right? And we talked about mindfulness for a bit, and that bio needs to be updated. Like, Chrysalis is now the Inner Work Center, for example. I teach mindful-based stress reduction. And one of the most important things that I teach is to teach people how to face what they fear, right? Those stressors that arise, instead of running away from them, drinking them away, or Netflixing away, or any other ways, right? Is to sit with the fear. And what happens when we do that? What looked like a mountain, turns into a plain. Those fears begin to dissipate, right? And so that kind of emotional intelligence is something that we need to bring in value as well.
Thank you, John.
Yeah.
Dr. Julie Alexander.
Thank you. I'm going to approach the issue from a different perspective. Every century, we have an epiphany as a country, and we ask ourselves, whether it's conscious or not, do we want to live up to our aspirational ideals, or do we want to maintain the status quo? And each century, we answer the latter as opposed to the former. But in this 21st century, it's different than any other century we've had previously. And that difference is we have had a demographic shift. And this demographic shift has caused those who want to maintain the status quo to basically lose their minds.
Well said.
Our history is our history. And it does not matter how much we lie about it, run away from it, it follows us. It follows us in our physical and our cultural DNA. Our society has been a very violent society. It has taken over people's homes and destroyed communities and societies. It has engaged in human trafficking for over 300 years. And we have justified it. And we've gone to the point of trying to hide it from our public sphere rather than really acknowledging. And when you hide and you run from your past, you become, in so many ways, psychotic. And we have to make a decision. Do we want our democracy, our nation, to not only live up to its aspirational ideals, but do we want it to survive? And there are people in our country who would rather see the nation destroyed than to really live up to those aspirational ideals. And what we are seeing right now is just that. But who wants to stand in the gap? to be that voice to say enough. You know, the governor issued as his first executive order, he told everyone that the one thing he fears the most is for our Commonwealth to live up to the aspirational ideals of this nation. That is what he said in that executive order. And he wants generations to continue to be ignorant and to swim in the hypocrisy and the stereotype and the ignorance of not knowing our history. And if you don't know it, then you don't understand who your neighbors are. You don't understand what is happening right now in society and why people react and behave the way they do. And I'm not just talking about African Americans, because truly, if you have lived in a society as repressive as Virginia has been for almost 400 years, actually over 400 years, if you lived in that society, it doesn't matter if you're part of the ruling classes, you do not have a voice. You disagree with the status quo and you will be squashed just like everyone else. You are beaten into submission. You are basically made to be afraid to disagree. That's what this hotline is all about. But my question is this: so what if you get reported? Exactly what are they going to do? What law have you violated? What statute actually allows someone to go after you? And if we are people of good conscience, why isn't there a lawsuit against Executive Order number 1?
Yeah.
Because I would like to know what statutory law that executive order is based. Because as far as I recall, back in the 1870s, they removed all those types of laws from the books. And so exactly what statutory law is Executive Order number 1 based? That says that you cannot teach truth. That you cannot teach knowledge, especially if it has to do with race. And so I'm going to stop right there before I get into some serious trouble.
We're going to round out the opening comments with Senator Hashmi.
Wow, good afternoon. Well, first of all, I just want to thank everyone who's here. I want to thank the organizers who give us this opportunity to address such serious issues. And I especially want to thank anyone who is a teacher or is a teacher adjacent at this moment. I know the teachers have borne the brunt of so much of what is happening in these culture wars in the last 2 years, 3 years, and it's been extraordinarily challenging, and I am just in awe of the courage, the resilience, and the ways in which our teachers continue to support our students. So thank you for all that hard work. I'm approaching this afternoon with a bit of a challenge because I am an academic. I see a lot of the work that I do through an academic lens. I've spent 30 years in the college classroom grappling with a lot of these issues, studying and talking about race, teaching the history through our American literature. And now I'm in a very odd position of working in government, working in politics, and seeing it from the other side, encountering these situations not as an abstract academic question or proposition, but really confronting the people who are trying to do all of these very nefarious things to our children and to education in general. So I just want to talk a little bit about some of the ideas that we've already heard here. Executive Order 1, as horrible as it is, and appalling that we have a state leader who thinks that this is policy that ought to go forward in some way. legislation into a bill, both on the Senate and both on the House side this past session, and it was brought in front of our committees. And I was just telling my friend Deborah, I'm fortunate to chair the subcommittee on public education. So the Senate bill, that was the first stop when Executive Order 1 came as a bill in front of the subcommittee. I literally laughed first when I saw it, and then we promptly killed it. We recommended that it be passed by indefinitely in the subcommittee, and it was so done in the full committee and never made it to the floor of the Senate. The House bill did pass out and came to us, and again, we promptly killed it. One of the questions that I had, and I had not just for the patrons of the bill, but also to our new Secretary of Education, to our new superintendent, to the governor himself, I've asked, what are inherently divisive concepts? And there's been no answer. There's just been, they can't even provide an example. And so when we sought to interrogate that idea, what exactly are you talking about? We're really, and we know what they're talking about. These are racist dog whistles. So anything that has to do with Black history, immigrant history, LGBTQ ideas, these are so-called inherently divisive concepts because they disturb a certain kind of a person. And so if you can't define what it is you're seeking to stamp down, then perhaps you ought to sit down and actually listen to people who are in the classroom. I've asked the governor directly to his face. I say stop listening to the people who are encouraging you to continue these culture wars, who are encouraging you to campaign rather than govern, and actually start listening to educators, because the educators can tell you a whole lot of truth of what's happening in the classrooms. And if you say you're listening to parents, please tell me which parents in particular you're listening to, because you're sure not hearing the parents that I'm talking to. You're sure not hearing a whole host of parents who, first of all, value the kind of education their students are receiving, parents who want their students to have the full breadth of experience, parents who understand that the purpose of education is to challenge and is to make us uncomfortable.
Yes.
These are the parents who I am talking to. So parents are not a homogeneous group, and I sure hope this administration begins to recognize that fact quickly and begins to listen to Virginians, because we haven't seen much of that happening lately. I am very concerned. I am concerned with the direction that we see public education going in under this administration. The very first act of the administration was to pull down the Office of Division and Equity and Inclusion, that website, all of the database that was, and the resources that had been built into that, the dashboards, all of those wonderful documentation that I know our colleges and universities, our school systems, all of our state agencies were using. All of that disappeared the very first few hours of the administration. And I asked that day, I said, what was your hurry? What were you in such a rush for? Why are you so afraid of the word equity? Because if you read the superintendent's interim report, which was issued as a result of that so-called executive order, the interim report points out every area in the Commonwealth where we use the word equity and wants it stripped out, as though that's a dangerous concept. That is frankly inherently disturbing to me, and I think it is for all of us. Because equity is not a four-letter word. Equity is the word, the concept, the idea, the goal that we ought to be striving for. And so
There are McCarthy-like impulses. We see this in the so-called snitch line. Well, I want a snitch line for everything else that is happening. So if you see abuse in your systems, if you're in the school and you're seeing abuse against your opportunity to speak and to represent or to protect the children you care about, I want us to snitch on that. I want us to talk publicly about what we're seeing. I want the media to appropriately cover this information. I want us all to hold the administration accountable. We also need to hold ourselves accountable, because this is a moment for us to speak out against racism, to be anti-racist. And let's break that down. We don't want to be just anti-racist. We want to speak out against anti-Black racism, because that in itself is something. We need to point out areas of anti-Asian racism, anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, transphobia, homophobia. All of these are part and parcel of different kinds of bigotry, but we have to speak out collectively and individually, because they hurt all of our communities in different ways. I'll stop there and take notes.
So on the topic of equity, I'm going to toss this one to John first, regarding the LGBTQ community. So at a school board meeting, we've heard parents passionately afraid that a transgender student is going to walk into the girls' bathroom and pay attention to my little girl in the girls' bathroom. And she was adamant that that could happen. And her fear resonated with other parents that came and spoke to that language. How would you approach the situation where you're trying to educate a community that is fearful of what they don't understand?
That's a tough one because, gosh, Gary was the word fake news. Did that go through?
No.
Dare I say the word fake news, right? I mean, it's one of those gray sort of memes or lies that captures people's imagination, that has no fact, right? It has nothing true about it, no basis for that. Actually, what's happening with queer kids, and especially trans kids, who are the ones that are most in danger, or the most that are suffering the most, what is happening is that the moment school starts in that year, they're holding their breath, right? They are literally in fear because of all the various ways that people can come for them, right? They're also looking for support. And so they're looking for stickers or some kind of indication that there's going to be someone that's going to be there for them. So when I say stickers, like a rainbow sticker, something, that's there. They're looking for language instead of, like, for example, using, I talk about my partner, who was my wife, but I talk about my partner, for example. I use my pronouns. I'm John Taylor. My pronouns are he, him, right? Various kinds of ways where they can find support. The last thing that they're talking about is getting weird in a bathroom, right? That they often can't use anyway, right? And so they're often running from one end of the campus to another to where they can use the bathroom anyway. So this is all just this made up, beautiful sort of story to cause people to freak out for no reason.
So to Christine, the teacher that has to handle that conversation in the classroom, right? So my child wants to be identified as a boy. They want to be called Larry. How does the teacher handle that in the classroom, considering the environment that we're in? Because you have people in that classroom whose parents are like, don't you do that. Don't you tell my child anything regarding that subject. Isn't that just a very difficult arena for a teacher to navigate?
It definitely can be. As a secondary teacher, I got to have a unique relationship with my students. And we got to really have some open conversations about identity, not just racial identity, but also, gender identity, sexual identity. I had science up in my classroom that helped students feel welcome because I knew that that was to help break down a barrier that was getting in the way of them learning what I had to offer as a teacher and just as a person. I even had some students openly question my identity in class. And instead of shying away from the conversation and saying, oh, we can't talk about that right now because we have to focus on X, Y, and Z, I made it into a conversation. I said, well, I do identify as this, but would there be an issue if I identify otherwise? Would there, and why is that? And allowing them to explore that conversation in a space where if they said the wrong thing, it's a gentle correction. It's a gentle, well, I understand where you're coming from. I have heard that before, but let's open up our thinking to, well, this person identifies as this, but they're here trying to learn just like you are. And opening up that conversation in the classroom just allows students to feel like they have the permission to explore that. They may just want to explore it. They might find at the end of the day that that's not what they want to identify as, and they move on to the next thing. But being able to allow students to just explore who they want to be and how they want to speak is just a small step to making sure that our students feel safe. As the Chesterfield educator, I might add that recently in the news we saw something very unfortunate happen in the bathroom of a high school. And to be quite honest, it was in the same district as the school board representative who abstained from the vote to pass the transgender bill, to pass that policy in our county. And so, we have to confront, as we continue to say, we have to confront this at every level. We have to confront that school board member and ask, okay, what are we going to do to mitigate that situation that actually did happen? How are we going to have those conversations with our students, our communities, and our parents to help them understand that it's not just one population of identity or of a person that's going to commit these things, and we need to understand overall how to have these conversations in a safe space, but in a way that educates.
And it's not by accident that sexual assault, that was heterosexual sexual assault, was not discussed. But had that been the population that they're trying to target, it would be everywhere, right? So the onus is on us as well to make more of those instances, to hold them accountable for those instances as well. I'm going to toss this one to Dr. Ruby Alexander. You brought up the U.S. Constitution. We just watched, if you had the opportunity, to watch our Senate confirmation hearings. So talk about being in a room full of mediocre white men. That was a lesson in grace, great class, and education all in itself. But to the point of the originalist theory and the Constitution, you had mentioned it, how do we use the document that everyone else wants to use to our advantage to help educate them, right? Because there are originalists out there that believe the Constitution should be interpreted the way the founders wrote it. But keep in mind, that document was not written with people that look like me in mind. It was not written for LGBTQ plus persons. It was technically written for 21-year-old white male landowners.
Yeah. Right.
Okay, that is what that document protects. But I believe in using the tools of the oppressor to educate. So can you enlighten a little bit on how we can take that document and use it to help push the critical race theory concept? Like, this is how we get there. We're going to use your document.
A lot of people forget that there was a thing called a fugitive slave clause in the original Constitution. So you want to not talk about race, but you want to be an originalist with the Constitution. I'm I'm having a hard time just understanding, conceptualizing this schizophrenic mindset. But it actually is part of America. I've done a lot of research and writing on the Underground Railroad in Virginia. And one of the things that has struck me so much is that when we talk about Virginia's industries, we talk about tobacco. But tobacco was not Virginia's primary industry. Virginia's primary industry was human trafficking. And we hide in plain sight the reality. We don't talk about and list in the census records and in the city directories and county directories. We don't list people as slave traders. We call them euphemistic terms, merchants, and just traders in general. We had slave jails and slave markets that never had an address identified. We would put it in newspapers and say, oh, take them to the slave jail, but never say where, because everyone knew where it was. It was in the center of town, because the center of town was the center of commerce. And so we have had this difficult relationship with truth and reality in our society. And it began with our Constitution, where we try to talk about these aspirational ideals. But the Constitution, basically, while it applied to everybody in the country, it only empowered less than 10% of the population. So all these people, you know, it's just like people who want to imagine themselves on an antebellum plantation when they love to get married, and or, you know, be part of some sort of antebellum ball. And I remind people, you would not be there. I don't know what your fantasy is or why you have that particular fantasy, but you would not be there because you are not part of that 1% who would actually be there. Not only that, but that plantation is fictional as well, because if you look at most of the plantations during that time, they were small farms. So I don't know where people get these ideas except through the media. Our culture as a society has perpetrated a lot of lies, a lot of illusions, a lot of delusions, and a lot of stereotypes. And the biggest one has to do with our Constitution. I would venture to say that probably only about 10% of our population has actually read the Constitution. And those who are clamoring for certain things in the Constitution are most of the ones who have not read the Constitution, because they could not possibly say the things that they say about having an original idea. Let's go back to this original concept. And I know Justice Scalia was one of the first people, and I want to say, I'm sorry, sir, you would definitely not have the Constitution apply to you. And so I'm really having a difficult time with ignorance and with intentional ignorance for political one-upsmanship. But I would say the most important thing is that people of good conscience, people who understand, people who know, have to stop being afraid to speak out. Fear is a killer of dreams, is a killer of the potential, and it can be the killer of our society. And so this notion that people want to go back to the original concepts of the Constitution, think about this. Now, the Constitution's ink was not even dry before amendments were added. And those amendments explain how to apply the Constitution. So we have a Supreme Court, but it wasn't even called a Supreme Court in the original document. It really wasn't until Marbury versus Madison, I'm starting to get legal that told us how the courts are going to operate. And so we have a document that had no operational guide. It was President George Washington who created a part of an operational guide. But the original Constitution did not even have a real governmental structure associated with it. And so when people say that, what they want to do is eliminate people's rights. Whenever they say that, and I remind them, you know what? Shoulda, coulda, woulda. That's a shoulda, coulda, woulda. We're not there. We are centuries past that point. If you want to go back to that time, please invent a time machine and go back and live in that time. And I guarantee you, you will not enjoy that time because you will not be one of those privileged individuals. Where we are right now, because the Constitution was written to have amendments, the very concept and ideology behind the Constitution was to change, was to adapt, was to correct. And so when we talk about and celebrate the incredible brilliance behind the Constitution, and we want to ignore the very fabric of how the Constitution was supposed to change, was supposed to adapt, was supposed to expand, then we really do not know what that Constitution said. It's important in the classroom to teach students this. I don't know why we want to go and create a George Orwellian 1984 world or an autocratic world where the idea of freedom is only defined by a few people. And it's freedom to do what I want you to do. That's not freedom. And so I would like for people to realize that your freedoms are being conscripted. Your freedoms are being challenged. I know that our young people especially are, and our society in general is caught up in entertainment. But you know, there are a lot of apocalyptic entertainment movies and films out there. Which one do you want to live in? Because they're all scary. And so the world I want to live in is one in which my freedom should not be intruded on by your freedom. And in a cooperative society, you have to find that middle ground. And that middle ground does not mean that you have the freedom to keep history from being taught, or to keep my identity from being a part of our world and our society. For so long, Virginia especially has tried to create two races of people, white and black. And I have news for everybody. Virginia hasn't been white or black since 1619. Because people intermingle, and they have been intermingling for over 400 years. And even before the first Africans were forced to come to Virginia, the white men here were intermingling with the women, the native women. And so the reality is different than this artificial construct that we have in our world and our society. And it's important that we not only acknowledge that, but we talk about it, we have our children know that history so that we can live in the civil society together. Thank you.
Thank you.
Tossing this question over to Deborah and Senator Hashmi, the legislative aspect of it, we shouldn't have to legislate good conscience, right? You talk about the things that you're having to fight in Congress that are coming, in the General Assembly that are coming to you. What is it that you need the people in this room to do to help you with that battle? Because we have an election every year in Virginia, right? So we have our opportunity. But what else can we do, Senator Hashmi, to get you what you need to help fight the good fight?
That's a great question, and I think a lot of the folks who are in this room are already very, very much involved in that good fight, because I certainly see you in the halls of the General Assembly. I see you during session, and you are speaking out in our committee meetings and representing the good fight. So we need more of that, though, because the other side is quite loud and quite aggressive in delivering their message and making sure that they are getting the national public and the media attention. And we want to make sure that we have all of the full representation of points of view adequately expressed. And so being intrinsically involved in the legislative process, identifying those harmful bills, particularly those bills that are going to impact your community or the people that you love and care about, and then speaking out with courage to address that is really what we need. And I know it takes a lot of courage. I have personal friends who are involved in this, and particularly during session this past year, we saw very transphobic bills coming, attacking trans children in our school system, even though we have a Department of Education policy now to protect trans children. There were attempts to dismantle those policies, and those attempts were those attempts came with bigotry. The people who spoke in support of those transphobic bills really came to speak about their own bigotry against trans children. And I have friends who brought their trans children to the General Assembly. What courage it takes, first of all, for the family to step out publicly to do that. But what broke my heart was that a child has to do that. A child has to come in front of adults and ask for their dignity, for their human right, for their representation, for the acknowledgement of who and what they are. And that is not a burden that we should be putting on our children. That is something that we as adults ought to have the courage to do. And I think the more that we are able to address it, to speak it, to shine light upon it, the more the way we will be able to create that kind of inclusive society, because I know there are far more good people in this world than there are those who try to oppress and take away the rights of others. And so we need to hear your voices.
Thank you, Deborah. You're strong in the community, organizing them for your campaign. You were out there knocking on doors, beating the streets. What else can we do to have these conversations a little bit more often, or reach an audience that really doesn't want to hear what we have to say? Can you talk to a little bit to how we break down those barriers that you were talking about before?
Sure, thanks, Dominique. But first, I just wanted to add to what the doctor just said. I think there's been a glorification of the, quote, family fathers. When we talk about them, or when some people talk about them, it's just so glorious. But we forget that 27 of the 56 of the founding fathers were slave owners who trafficked them, who sold them, who kept them in bondage. So why would we think that the documents that they wrote would ever have any application to us? So I just think we need to learn our history, and she also touched on 1619. And when people talk about critical race theory, that's the next thing they say, 1619. How many of you in here, and you don't have to raise your hand, read the book or read the 1619 Project? It's history. It's not, you've not heard any of those people complain about it ever saying that it was wrong. And that's because it told the truth about history. So in order to combat some of these misinformations and some of these talking points, we have got to arm ourselves with knowledge and the education of what really is truth and what is not truth. And that goes back to what my colleague said about fake news. We've got to start combating that and just saying, it's just wrong, you're just not telling the truth. And when you talk about what we should do, I don't know how many tours during the campaign, and I was kind of disheartened with people who I knocked on their doors, and a lot of those people were, quote, allies, or Democratic supporters, who have such apathy. I don't know where it came from. I don't know, I don't have the answer as to how to change that or make it better. But, you know, Dr. Faison talked about being tired. Well, I'm a 65, almost 66-year-old Black woman who's really tired of fighting the same battles over and over again. And, you know, we all know the saying. It's all right to talk about that, because I'm sure you guys are tired of it too. You know the saying that insanity is doing the same thing over and over again, expecting to get different results. We have got to break that cycle of insanity that we are finding ourselves in, waiting for somebody else to speak up for us, waiting for somebody else to be the savior for us, waiting for, I don't know what, to fall from the sky and say, okay, everybody's going to wake up, we're going to sing Kumbaya, and this world is going to be a great place. It is not, people. We are going to have to do it ourselves. So what I say is, we have got to realize that because we made progress, we can't sit back and rest on those laurels. We have got to continue the fight. I thought the fight was over. I mean, I grew up in the segregated South, where I didn't go to integrated schools until the 7th grade. I was a part of separate but equal. Listen, people, it is not. And so when we talk about what they're doing in our schools today and wanting to segregate, you know, that's what charter schools are. They're wanting to segregate kids again. You know what they're saying when they use these buzzwords. They're trying to make a better society for them and not us. And us is the majority of the people that we live with. So what I would say is, and I did when I knocked these doors, it's like half the people didn't even know their election. Elections have consequences. So we have got to educate ourselves as to who we're putting into office. I think a lot of those parents who were for parents' rights have a whole lot of regret for electing Governor Young. And I hate to say this, but you get what you deserve when you don't do anything. So what I would say to the answer to your question is, we have got to wake up. We have got to realize that nobody's going to come to save us but us. And we've got to get out here, we've got to talk to our kids, we've got to get our young people involved, because I don't know how many, I have a 21-year-old daughter, and I don't know how many of her friends I've talked to who said, that stuff doesn't have anything to do with me. It has to do with all of us. And if we don't start waking up and taking our responsibility and doing it ourselves, it's not going to get done. And we're going to be destined to repeat that history of being right back where we started, in that cycle of insanity.
Thank you, Deborah. So, the theme from the first group was fear and indoctrination. The theme of the second group is education, right? They all go together. In order for us to have a successful, inclusive community, we have to break the indoctrination, kill the fear through education, right? So I know we said this before, we're preaching to the choir in this room, but just an example real quick before we wrap up. The white ally. Some of you might follow me on Facebook or Instagram or not, but I posted a quote, and I read it at the school board meeting. Some of the people who are against equity like to quote Dr. King often. And as Dr. Faison said, context is important. What goes before that sentence and after that sentence is important. in the letters from Birmingham jail, he talks about the white ally, and that the white ally might be the detriment to what he was trying to achieve. And what was he trying to say to that? I had a conversation with a white friend of mine. I call them my work mom, right? She was awesome. She has always been awesome. I've known her for 12 years. We went to lunch and we were having a conversation, and I started crying during the conversation, listening to the words that were coming out of her mouth that she didn't fully understand what she was saying and how it affected me. And what we get to, what I want you to understand is that I should not be the exception to the rule, right? Often black people are always told, you know, you're very articulate. I just want you to know, just in case you did not know, you're hearing from a black friend, that is a microaggression. Please do not tell an educated black person that it's not articulate. Because what that is saying, if you look at the definition of the word articulate, is the ability to communicate a thought. Children can communicate a thought. So you're telling me that you're impressed by my ability to communicate a thought. She didn't understand, because I could see it in her eyes when she saw me crying, the words that were coming out of her mouth and her inability to understand that what she was saying impacted just beyond me and not just me. She was hurt by what she was saying to me. So she's not a Karen, I gave her a new name, it's Betty. Right? So Betty is your white ally who is at the fight with you, at the marches with you, advocating next to you, but still not aware of what's going on around you. When I brought up the charter bill, when I brought up the Governor Youngkin's Executive Order number 1, when I brought up the whitewashing of history, she was oblivious to that actually happening. Because the circle that you're in is all that you know, right? So on this list of what we can do, I need you to get up and find another circle. I need you to get up and go to a different place. I said at a school board meeting, I need those representatives to go to a different school and meet some different people. Christine was mentioned in her bio, she teaches ESL and Spanish for teachers. I'm bilingual. The school that my children go to has a significantly heavy Hispanic population. How many people in that building do you think speak Spanish? One. One person. And do you know that these teachers are using Google Translate to try to communicate to their parents and their students? That is terrible. Number 2, open up. Have an open mind and be open to these conversations. Both panels have said it's going to be uncomfortable. And if it's uncomfortable, then you know you're doing the right thing. Because it's not meant to be easy in your spirit. It's meant to stir you up. It's meant to make you cringe when you hear those words coming out of the person that you consider a friend, their mouths. 3rd, speak up. Senator Hashmi already said it. We've heard everyone else say it. We have to speak up. You can no longer sit silently on the sidelines. If you follow me, you hear me say that all the time. It's time to get in the game. We can't afford any more sidelines. We can't. So if you're for us and about us, and I say us inclusively, black, brown, LGBTQ, because we need all those voices. We cannot do it alone. And the last one, lift up. We can't, there's enough success and prosperity in our country for everyone to win. And this concept that only one group can win is a lie. So as you reach one and you teach one, lift up another one. Spend the time it's going to take to lift up each other, because only together can we get through this. And I know that everyone is not a Christian, but I would just say that there's a part that talks about faith without works. So for everyone who's waiting on Jesus to fix everything, I hear you. I hear you. But what are you doing to help Jesus out? Because he's got a lot of stuff to do, okay? So let's follow the get up, open up, speak up, lift up, so that we can get past some of these things and thrive. Because if we can't do it alone, we have to do it together. I want to thank everybody for their time, for coming out this afternoon. I know we went long, but you saw the fire from our campus.
With flowers,